Welcome to the third and final episode of Marketing by the Minute, Season 3 After Class, and I am your host, Skyla Bentley. Throughout the series, we'll be exploring the different stages of WWU marketing alumni, with late career alum being the focus of today's episode. This podcast is being run, created, and edited by integrated marketing communication students with the goal of giving alumni an outlet to connect with current marketing students and give them insight into their personal marketing journey and the steps they have taken since graduation. Okay, so today we are going to be joined by Marketing Western alum Chris Copacino, who graduated from Western in 2003 with a Bachelor of Science in Communications with a marketing focus. Throughout this episode, we will be exploring Chris's time at Western, how his degree has guided him throughout his marketing journey, and how he continues to find success within the ever-changing marketing industry. Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to be the last guest of this installment of After Class podcast. How is your morning going?
It's great. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. Always happy and willing to help out fellow Vikings. So this will be fun.
Yes, yeah. We're super excited to have you here. So we actually start each episode with our guests sharing with us their kind of like elevator pitch. As many upcoming graduates are trying to come up with their value proposition with the hopes of differentiating themselves against, other, new marketing graduates and entry-level marketers. So to finish the marketing alum life cycle, as an executive marketer, what do you bring to the table that nobody else does?
That's a great question. I think there's a combination that I personally bring, but I think that is kind of a winning combination of hard and soft skills. And so, on the hard skills, for what I do, I help businesses succeed, and where businesses, where business strategy and communication strategy kind of intersect, that's where I get involved. So to do that, you really have to lean in and understand how different businesses work. What are barriers to success? What competitive landscapes look like, audiences, and all those different things. And so, really being intellectually curious and digging in and understanding that is key. But then, I think high emotional intelligence is huge too. That's something that has been gaining popularity probably over the last 5 to 10 years. And a lot of employers these days talk about, they hire for emotional intelligence and then we'll teach hard skills after the fact. And I think there's something to that. Kind of all humility aside, I think I have a fair amount of emotional intelligence, being able to read a room, use different communication approaches with different folks, not in a kind of manipulative way, but everybody needs to be approached a different way, and really understanding where they're coming from, having a high degree of empathy. It's become a little bit of a cliche, but this idea of leaning in and really being engaged and demonstrating to people that you are authentically leaning in and engaged goes a long way. So hopefully that answered your question.
No, yeah, definitely. No, I like what you said about, just like having people skills and being able to communicate, because I think, we're taught this a lot throughout the marketing program, is that communication is one of the biggest, like foundational elements of marketing, is that you're communicating value to, your prospective target market. So you have to be able to understand who those people are, how to approach them, and really be able to form that relationship in order to communicate that value and even just create that value there. So I think I think that makes a lot of sense. So before we get into your professional experience, I'm sure everyone would love to know what Western was like in the early 2000s, and what ultimately led you to pursue a degree in marketing.
Yeah. It was, I loved my time at Western, and I'll tell anyone who will listen about the quality of education and community at Western. I got up there in 1999, was a Ridgeway Beta resident for a year, and then moved off campus. But I always appreciated I remember I had a professor who one time said, the root word in university is universal. And I always appreciated Western's approach to a universal education, making sure that you were well-rounded both in some of the social sciences, hard sciences. And so, from my standpoint, I kind of knew I would gravitate towards communication, media, marketing somewhere. I took early in my educational career, took intro to public speaking. Generally liked it, and got more involved in the communication program and department. At that time, I think this is still the case, the communication major made you actually pick a minor, and that could be an official university minor, or it could be just a concentrated course of study. And I was interested in marketing. My dad was in advertising, and they call us ad babies, so we kind of grew up around the business. And I kind of had a sense I'd graduate towards, advertising, marketing, media, communication somewhere. And I wanted some of those marketing classes. And I also really wanted to get through in 4 years. So what I did is I ended up petitioning to work kind of interdepartmentally and take a bunch of marketing classes that formed a concentration. It was a little bit perilous at times because I had no standing. It was like it was marketing, business majors with business administration majors with marketing focuses first, minors second. And I was way down the list, but I was able to get into the classes I needed and graduated. And so yeah, from that standpoint, my education was great. I remember we had some guest professors, one from Wharton School of Business that I took a management class from. That you can't replicate that. And then on the community side, I just always appreciated Western's welcoming, inclusive nature. I mean, there's no wrong answers, but because it's a personal thing. But I always appreciated there was no Greek system because I felt like it really did force acceptance and inclusivity, and we're all in this together. So really enjoyed that, and I still have really really good friends that spawned from my time at Western. So I look back at it fondly, and like I said, I'll tell anyone who will listen about the virtues of Western.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Yeah, no, I think people take like a liberal arts education for granted sometimes, and professors have said this before, and it really sticks with me. Is that Western and any liberal arts college, they're teaching you how to learn.
Mm-hmm.
You can take all of these skills and stuff, but it's so that in the future, when anything faces, you'll be able to digest that and approach it confidently. So it's nice to hear that you're still using those skills and stuff to this day. But yeah, and with the Greek system as well, I think that was definitely something that drew me to Western because there's, and even today, there's so much controversy surrounded around that. So it's nice to know that, the concept of inclusivity is really like put forth here at Western.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of mentioned this a little bit, but were there any classes or like a professor that had a major impact on your time here, like during school?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them that I remember. Dr. Karen Stout in the communication department was my mentor, and I'm still in touch with her, and she helped me a lot. And both from kind of what you said, learning how to learn, and kind of learning how to grow up and be a professional, or at least a professional student. Um, but also on the communication side too. I loved the classes I took from her. Uh, there was a professor named Tara Perry who's in the communication department, and that was the first real kind of formal education I got into, kind of some of the DEI themes. And I was in the early 2000s, but it was around um, uh, intercultural marketing, and I took a intercultural communication and professional communication course from her, but a lot of DEI themes through that, and that was really kind of eye opening for me. On the business side, I had a great economics professor. I don't know if he's still there, named Mr. Sleeman, Professor Sleeman, who did amazing lectures, and took really kind of out of classroom abstract ideas to reinforce kind of core economic points. And I never missed a lecture with him. Um, yeah, and probably more that I'm remembering right now, but both in the marketing department and outside. I just really enjoyed my professors during my time there. Enjoyed the access to professors. Wendy Wilhelm is another one who was at in the marketing department for a long time. She helped me. She was actually my kind of advocate when I worked interdepartmentally to get that concentration I mentioned, and she was just a really smart, seasoned marketer who happened to be teaching marketing that I took a lot from. So yeah, I mean, to a person, just great, great experiences with the educators.
Yeah, it's good to hear that I don't know, you're still being impacted by the things that you learned, even, 20 years ago, it still follows you. So many marketing students who are currently looking for that first out of college job are debating whether they want to work for an agency or go in-house and whether like which path is the right one for them. Can you offer any advice for those approaching that decision?
Yeah, it's funny. I've met with probably 3 to 4 people over the last month who are kind of going through that same decision tree. And I start by saying there's no wrong answers. You know, And sometimes I'll meet with folks and they'll go, I really want to work at an agency. And I'm like, that's cool. Agency jobs can be hard to come by, especially junior level, and especially in Seattle, where I work. The agency scene has changed a lot. So what I tell folks is, yes, your goal might be to um, work in an agency one day, but you can work tangentially, in other positions to get that experience to then translate to an eventual agency job if it doesn't happen right out of the gate. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing too is that regardless of where you land in the marketing realm, if you kind of just take the dyad um, of agency or client side, I do think there's huge benefit to having worked in both. And so when if you go work in a marketing department and you have to interface with an agency, having been on the agency side, I think there's huge value in that. And then if you're working at an agency, having worked on the client side where you understand kind of the pressures and the day-to-days on the client side can build huge empathy. I have a blind spot. I've never really worked on the client side. I've always been on the agency side and kind of, looking in the rear view a little bit, I wish I wish I would have spent some time on the client side. So, I think the biggest thing is to find a culture and find an organization that feels good to you. Don't settle out of the gate. But I realize there's that pressure sometimes to land that first job, and this has become even more common, but it's always, over the last 20 years, it's been a thing. The first 5-10 years of your career are about splashing around and figuring it out a little bit. So you don't need to, and it's not always a linear path. So I think some people get wrapped around their gears sometimes because they're thinking like, okay, what's my stepping stone, stepping stone, stepping stone. And I think as long as you're taking things away from each experience, kind of filing those away for later, then you can splash around while still moving towards an ultimate goal.
Yeah, that's awesome. You were talking about how the agency scene in Seattle has changed. Can you kind of give us an insight into what that change has been?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pressures on the agency business, right? There's a lot of historical agency work has gone in house. All of our clients have some degree of in-house marketing group or creative group that looks and feels like an agency. They just happen to be inside an organization. So that's one thing. I think that the agency business is tough, right? To have clients that are enduring clients, that where you're making the margins that allow you to continue to go to keep the continuity of leadership and staff is challenging. And so I say all that as back, and then the pandemic, right? Like we can't pretend like the pandemic didn't happen, which created huge headwinds for agencies. A lot of clients pulled back budgets, kind of looked elsewhere, went quiet. It certainly happened to us. We feel very fortunate in being able to work through that, but some agencies weren't as lucky. And I say that all as backdrop that, we used to have, it was a small, decently insular community in Seattle, but you had some really good mid-sized agencies on the on the landscape, and that's changed. We have some bigger agencies, networked agencies in town. We have a lot of smaller agencies in town. 8 to 12, kind of senior, sometimes sole proprietor driven. There used to be more mid-sized agencies. Wong Duty, and Wong Duty's still around. They're doing great, but they've been acquired by a consultancy, and so their kind of thing has changed. Green Rubino, DNA, and Copacino Fujikato. Wexley School for Girls isn't around anymore, and and some of those other agencies have changed or evolved or pivoted or unfortunately shuttered, or aren't exactly what they were. So the whole situation has changed a little bit, and I think part of that is the community, and this is something that I think about a lot, is the connectedness of the community has been disrupted a little bit by COVID, and I think we're trying to get back to that. Trying to kind of recenter ourselves, but also just the challenges of our industry has kind of sifted out some of the agencies, and sometimes it makes me sad because I think that iron sharpens iron, and we're all the kind of to use a bad term like frenemies. Like even though we compete for business and we're competitive, we're still friends and we still want the best things for other agencies. So see agencies fall on hard times it's kind of disheartening to me. I feel fortunate that we've been able to power through. There were times in the pandemic where we looked at each other and go, "How is this going to work?" We had a very much, let's survive and then thrive, and kind of credit to our leadership, credit to our people, credit to our clients. Most importantly, we've been able to make it through, and I think we feel like we're on the backside and maybe not thriving, but totally, but definitely on the way to that.
Yeah, but you would think like the community of the company that you're working at is what really like pulled everyone together to keep going and to like, strive to achieve more, even in a time of hardship like COVID.
Yeah, I think so. I think our leadership really kind of set the tempo of that. We had an interesting thing. Without going too far into the weeds, we re-upped our lease in our office down on Fourth and Pike, right up from the Pike Place Market, in 2019, because that's what you were supposed to. No one knew that the world was going to stop, and so we re-upped our lease, and part of that was. We got a bunch of tenant improvements to refurbish our offices as part of re-upping that long-term lease. Those had to be used in calendar year 2020. So I only say that as a backdrop and context for in February of 2020, we were ready to go remote for 12 weeks, just anyways, because we were going to remodel our offices. We were going to take up space at WeWork. We were going to work remotely. We upgraded our Zoom technology even before like Zoom became like the most powerful thing in the world. We you know Kind of our remote security settings and everything. We kind of made sure they were good. But then we saw this kind of coming cloud of the pandemic and the news that was coming. So we never started that construction project, or we started it later, but we were ready to go work remote. So I think our transition to that was quicker, and a little bit of sheer force of will, right? Like we just had to go. Okay, we have clients who still need things. We have a business that needs to sustain. We have people who rely on this for their livelihoods. How are we going to make this work? And we did. We got scrappy. We got creative. No revenue was bad revenue. And it was a really kind of coming together of our agency community, kind of vision set by leadership, but a credit to people across the agency to pull together and try to make as much lemonade out of the lemons we were dealt. And we struggled. That some of the federal loans that were available helped us for sure, but starting in about October of 20, we started to win some business and started to kind of come back, and 21 was good. 22 was even better, and we're pretty optimistic as we look ahead.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think being optimistic is because I often find myself being a little pessimistic just, with the state of the world. It's so easy to do that, but it's a powerful skill to be able to be optimistic and be able to push through things like that. And you see the success as, with Copacino Fujikata, like you guys persevered through that. And even though you had like a little bit of an advantage kind of going online, you still wouldn't have been able to persevere through that without that optimism. So backpedaling just a little bit. So when you first graduated from Western, what sort of things like skills or roles were you hoping to find in that first job out of college?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I was looking to apply my education, but do it in a way that where there was learning. So I was looking to attach myself to leader or leaders I could really learn from. And not to make this all about the pandemic, but I think that's some of the kind of the negative part of working remotely is that young people in new jobs didn't had less connection to their leaders, weren't able to learn through osmosis. I was. And so, the ability, so that was a big thing, is just find a leader that I could learn from and kind of be that proverbial sponge. I wanted to find a place that would allow me to have an impact kind of right away on the work. That's a whole other discussion maybe we can get into later about, big versus small agencies and those kind of things. But I've always worked for smaller agencies. And the benefit of that is that you have more, you can see more immediate impact of your work, on the work and on the progress you're making. Um, I think that those are the big things. I mean, I felt I left Western with a really good, solid foundation, both in kind of hard and soft skills, and maybe that's kind of mirrors my education and kind of the human communication versus kind of more nuts and bolts marketing kind of melded together. But I was ready just to put that to practice and kind of show folks what I could do, and but also, be that lifelong learner, and really learn from people who've been doing this a lot longer than I had.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that connects to what you were saying earlier about like just not putting so much pressure on yourself coming out of college. Like the first 5 to 10 years is just kind of getting your footing and knowing what you want, because marketing in the marketing industry, there are so many different paths you can take. So it's confining to just put yourself on that one path and just try and stick to that. So I think that's reassuring to all of the people who are preparing to graduate to just know there's so many opportunities and you can do whatever you want, and you can make an impact in whatever you're doing.
Totally. And I think to that point, it's like you might still have a goal. Hey, I want to do this at one point, but like it doesn't have to be, like I said earlier, like this straight line. You can kind of ping pong around as long as your eyes on the prize and work your way towards that.
Definitely, yeah. With that, can you walk us through your career journey and how that led you to Copacino Fujikato? And then, just for those who are unaware, kind of give the audience just like a brief description of what CF is and what they offer.
Yeah, yeah. So my just all cards on the table, and nepotism aside, but I'll speak to this in a second. My dad started the agency with his business partner Betty Fujikato, and we're actually 25 years this year. The first day of that they were open was January 1st, 1998.
Oh my gosh, congrats. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
thank you. So I'd grown up around the business, but I will promise you that wasn't a foregone conclusion. I was just going to go work for Daddy's agency. Like that wasn't going to be a thing that, you know. Um, so so uh, so when I got out of school, I was thinking about what was next, and I wasn't even married about staying in. I'm born and raised in Seattle, but it wasn't a foregone conclusion that I was going to just stay in Seattle, and so I almost moved to Boston. I almost took a job with the San Diego Padres in San Diego, but I was still kind of interested in Seattle. I liked Seattle. I didn't necessarily just want to jump ship, you know, to do so. Uh, but I was also really kind of interested in the marketing communications world, and so almost was a finalist for a job at the Seahawks, and you know didn't get it. An internal candidate got it. I continued to kind of work in. I had a friend who was connected to an agency. I temped there for about a month, just kind of worked my way around. And actually, during that time, working as a temp in that agency, I was like, man, I really do like kind of agency life. I kind of like that vibe. I kind of like what it's about. And then I was very much, thinking about, well, I'm going to stay in Seattle. And so then those kind of two forces started to kind of combine, and I was like, well, if I'm going to stay in Seattle and work at an agency, it's going to make for some really awkward Thanksgiving dinners if I'm working at a competing agency, So like, and over that time, it started to evolve, and then literally one day, the phone rang, my phone, rang, and it was Betty Fujikato, who I'd known for a long time, but she said, "Hey, hey, we're starting to get really busy on REI. They Copacino Fujikato had won the REI account, doing a lot of work for them." And she said, "Would you like to come in and help us a little bit on REI?" And I was, 23, living at home, not a lot of dollars in the bank account and all that. And I said, "Yeah, I think that's great. Let's do that." So I did, and I it was kind of in a contract temp position for about 2 months. And I remember one night Betty and I were working together, and it was like 7:30 at night. We were finishing a presentation for the next day, and she said, "Hey, how would you like to come and work here full time?" And I was a little bit of like, okay, what does this all mean? And like, do I come work for Dad? And how's that work? And gosh, what does that mean for everyone else? And gosh, nepotism and all these different things. But I kind of was like, you know what? At this point, if I'm going to work in an agency, work in Seattle, I'm going to work here. And the way that worked was, my dad was a writer, creative by trade, and Betty is a strategist and business person by trade. And that was their kind of complementary, kind of situation. Um, and Betty's the smartest person I've ever worked under. I mean, worked under, she's incredible. And so I kind of, back to what I said earlier, it's like to find that leader that you can kind of glom onto and go, man, I can learn a lot from you. It was actually the most perfect position. So I did. When I worked there, so I kind of got over myself a little bit, and started working there for about 2.5 years, almost 3 years, working almost exclusively on RAI, uh, working on their kind of sale and grand opening initiatives for different stores and then their sale time periods. And then I actually left the agency. This is gonna sound very self-involved, but I think I like a quarter life crisis or whatever. I was like, what does it mean? I guess I could stay and work for this agency for the rest of my life. What does that mean? And I had a friend who became a partner in a boutique wine distributor, and we were out to drinks one night, and he said, would you like to come and be a sales and marketing person for me? And I was 26 and single at the time. I was like, yeah, that sounds great. So did that for about 2.5 years. Um, and I only say that because it was not a great experience. The marketing side of wine was really, really interesting. I loved it. And I actually carried that forward to work that when we did a lot of work for St. Michel Wine Estates back at the agency. But the sales side was brutal. And not to say all sales jobs are bad, but again, you have to find where you prosper. And I was in my car a lot by myself, staring at my windshield, driving to hell and back, trying to sell wine. And I missed super team oriented collaborative environments. And I had to come to that realization on my own. And I tell people that a lot. Like even in a bad situation, in a role or position or company or job yet that you despise, you can take things from that. And sometimes it's just the converse. I don't want to work in that kind of thing anymore. But you have to shine the light on those roles and those environments that you don't like, to find the environments where you do thrive and do prosper. And I think that's a really invaluable lesson. So I was like, I want to work in a more team focused environment, a more creative environment, more collaborative environment. And so I was kind of going through that. And then one day the phone rang again. It was Betty Fujikato, and she said, "Hey, I know you're doing this wine thing, and I hope it's going well, but we just lost an account person on our team, and I'd love to talk about you coming back to the agency." And I was kind of already there anyways, but I kind of needed that, like, oh, you want me? Great, cool. And so I came back in 2008 and have been there since.
Nice, nice. And what position do you hold there currently?
I'm a senior director of business development, so I'm in charge of our new business kind of effort. So um, you know new business is the lifeblood of an agency. You constantly need to bring new clients in. So I manage both our outbound proactive outreach and our inbound. We get a lot of inquiries, and we're fortunate that our reputation precedes. So we get a lot of emails, calls, and like, hey, is this a possible situation? My job is to figure out if it is a good opportunity for us, and then to land that. I also oversee our agency marketing, all of our different channels, and then get pretty involved in our business operations too, both like new capabilities, like, hey, we have a new thing. We're launching a podcast capability right now,
Mm-hmm.
coincidentally. But so what is that capability, and then how does it work exactly inside the agency, and then other kind of business operation and process stuff.
Yeah, that's super cool. Okay, so we're going to move into our next segment, which we call Juicy Questions. So we reached out to current marketing students when we were beginning developing this podcast, and we asked them to submit questions for late career marketing alum.
Mm-hmm.
And we then separated them into 3 separate buckets depending on the juiciness of the question. So we'll start with the not so juicy and with the extra juicy. And we are recording this virtually, so I am going to do the honors and picking the questions for you. So you have to trust my picking abilities.
And Skylar,
Okay,
we
so
trust.
here, yes.
Good.
So here's our first
All
bucket. Okay, so the first question: what are your favorite memories working in marketing?
right. A lot of them. One's more kind of like uh, global, uh, not global in the world, but just kind of like all encompassing. Is just working with really smart people. This industry, agency or marketing, draws interesting, smart, worldly people, and just working with those folks and taking something away and looking, kind of really understanding their perspective is really, really cool. Um, the time I mentioned, my 2.5 years marketing and selling wine. When I came back to the agency in 2008, I was very interested in, like, I still want to market wine because I really like that. And so we were able to work with St. Michel Wine Estates, Chateau St. Michel, 14 Hands, Columbia Crest, E-Raft, Steg's Leap, a bunch of other brands, and so we worked with St. Michel from about 2013 through 2020, and
Wow.
and that was awesome. We were able to grow with them. grow our capabilities. One of the best client agency relationships I've ever been a part of, where really those lines between client and agency are blurred, and it's just a team working together. So those are really fond memories. We did a, we The Seattle Mariners were our founding client, an inaugural client in 1998. So, and I managed that business for a while. So, going down to spring training, it's actually a little bit of like feeling it, kind of a void, because this would be about the time period where we'd be really busy working on Mariners campaigns for the upcoming season, and being down and shooting those commercials and being, I'm a baseball fan. I always have been. So, it was kind of a dream realized, but also just kind of the camaraderie, the fun, the collaboration, the stress, kind of good stress, and then ultimately the product that we created, kind of created this groundswell of fanfare that was really fun to be part of. So those are the big things that strike. But there's been a lot of cool memories and things that I take away. I feel really fortunate and privileged to have had those.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so we'll do one more question from this bucket.
Okay.
What do you love most about your career?
Yeah. Um, a couple things. So where I'm at now is I'm a leader, and I get to you know lead initiative projects in teams forward, and I really enjoy that. Like, I really enjoy kind of helping us achieve things. That's really really cool. Um, you know, in advertising, you have the unique ability to kind of think about how um, to change culture, to change behavior, to persuade, and not again in a manipulative way, but like, here's the thing, here's a benefit, think about it this way. Like, that's really powerful, and to do that with communication, or powerful messages, is really 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 fun. um I think the last thing, I mean, obviously, since I started in this business, it's changed a lot. I mean, I don't have to talk about the rise of digital and all those things. We know that, but the coolness to the ability of, like, if you have an idea, you can kind of make it. Like, if you put time and money aside for a second, if you dream it, you can do it. And then realities come in of time, money, and all those pragmatic things we have to talk about. But you can kind of do it, and that's amazing, right? You can make things, you can create things, you can fabricate things. Um, and that's pretty cool to have an idea and go, yep, we can do that, and then figuring out how to do it, and almost starting from A, and knowing that Z, and then along that path, is pretty cool.
Yeah, no, that's what makes me really excited about marketing is that the opportunities are really endless. And with, technology today, I'm very grateful to be graduating, in 2023. And like you were saying, you really get to do whatever you want, and you have so many resources and tools to be able to make that a reality.
Totally.
Okay, so now on to bucket number 2.
Moderately juicy, right?
Yeah, moderately juicy. Okay. How would you launch into a job after college if you had to do it over again?
Great question. um like, the over again part of that, means that you might have had some, misgivings or laments. I do think that, just is just my own personal experience, but I talked about not working on the brand side, in marketing, and I've always been on the agency side. I think, being on the client side, having being a client working with an agency, I think would have been a really good learning piece for me. And then, I sometimes, I think you have to be self aware and understand where your blind spots are in all facets. I lived in Portland for like 4 months, but I've beyond that, I've lived basically in Seattle. So, I may have taken that job in San Diego. I might have gone to Boston. I might have done that, and just getting that, you can always come home. You can always come back. But just gotten that perspective a little bit. And the last part of it, and then this is something I talk about with people trying to crack the agency world, is, big versus small agency. And there's no wrong answers. It's almost like how you pick a university or college to go to, right? Like, do you want to go to a state school with 70,000 people, or do you want to go to a smaller, 3,000 person liberal arts school? Do you want to go somewhere in between, like Western? Like, there's no wrong answers. It's just kind of what drives you and where you find most comfort in your surroundings. Same thing for big agency, for small agency. There's no good or bad. There's just things. That said, I do think there's benefit in people who want to make agency life their career, to work both in big and small agencies. And I don't have that. I've worked in small to mid-sized agencies my whole life, and I think I could have benefited from going and working at a big network shop in LA or New York or Chicago or San Francisco, and just gotten that experience both from the brand level, but also just training and just kind of the broader scale, of our industry.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so one last. Do you ever look back at what you learned at Western and use it?
Yeah, yeah, almost, daily, if not weekly. I mean, just and just like little takeaways, right? Little things. That we had to do work on our personal brand, and I think about that a lot. Like actually distill our personal brand. Takeaways, little things in little quips or thoughts that professors said. Like when I had a professor one, the marketing professor one time said, if you don't understand it, you're probably not in the target market. And that's always been really powerful to me, because you're like, well, I don't like it. Well, you're like, not intended for you. You're not supposed to even have an opinion on it. Uh, so yeah, I mean, absolutely. And then on the communication side, and really, you know, I took a communication ethics course my senior year, and just like how you have discourse with someone, but like do that ethically, is something I think about all the time, especially in tough conversations. Because like it's not always like super pleasant, but am I giving this person space? Am I making it? Am I making them feel comfortable? Are we allowing each other to get to a mutual outcome that we can feel good about? Those are things I draw on all the time.
Perfect. Okay, so now on to the extra juicy
Uh,
questions here.
Getting nervous.
I know. Okay, what is one thing you wish you did differently in your career? You kind of touched on this with the agency side, but anything else do you think?
Um, n- you know, I know. I think I kind of touched on it. You know, I, I landed softly in my career because it was familiar. Obviously, I think creating a little bit more discomfort if I'm like really self-effacing, and like good discomfort. I mean, my my job was always compartmentalized, where I was working under Betty. If you ever have the pleasure to meet Betty, she is a amazing woman, but there are no kind of handouts, and there are no like, so I had to work for it, and I did. But I think creating a little bit more kind of intentional discomfort along the way would have helped me more.
Okay, yeah. Mm, okay. What was your most embarrassing interview, and how did you prepare for it beforehand?
Embarrassing interview. Um, I remember an interview I went on, to an agency here in town. That's I don't know if they have a Seattle office anymore. FCB, Foot Cone Building. They had a Seattle office for a long time. And I wasn't prepared. So like, did I prepare? No, I did. I wasn't. I mean, I didn't really. I kind of knew, but like, I didn't know what I was walking into, and um, I think it was actually the first like legit interview that I did. And you can have all the, I think I did all the right things like academically. Like I kind of like I knew who I was meeting with. I tried to have questions to ask, like, all those things. But like, you know, in the room, and I just remember like I talked too much, which is not uncommon for me. And I think I didn't go as deep and I on answers, or I kind of stayed at the platitude level. I don't know. I just remember like walking out of there and I was like, that didn't feel as good as it could have been. I think I even said, and I can't believe I even said this, but like, you know, I think I even quoted Donald Trump, like because at that point, like the Apprentice was a big deal. I mean, I'm dating myself. The early 2000s, the Apprentice was a deal, and they asked me a question about, you know, kind of management. I was, I said, like I didn't want to show up one day and like you're fired. Like I look back on that, like what was I doing? Um, so yeah, I think that one. But you learn from it. Like I think I tell people a lot, when they're looking for jobs, like do interviews, even if I mean not to be disingenuous, but if you are in a decision period between do I interview or do I not interview, go interview, because it's like a muscle. Like you telling your story, reacting to those questions, connecting with different people is a muscle to develop, and I think that doing so is a good thing. So I got better at it, and I didn't quote Donald Trump anymore. So
That's I'll keep that. I'll
yeah,
keep that in mind
yes.
when I go interview. Yeah, in our integrated marketing communications class with Dan Purdy, he talks a lot about how being able to go into an interview like that is a skill that you have to have.
Mm-hmm.
Same with like, if you have a really really good resume, the resume is just getting you an interview. You have
Mm-hmm.
to be good at going through that interview process just to get to the next stage. So it's good to know that you can have practice and you can go to interviews and you can build up those skills. So it's funny to hear that everyone has those moments.
You know,
um,
Skylar, do you mind if I touch on that a second more?
yeah.
Because I just think there's something interesting in that, something I think about a lot. Um, Sometimes when folks go into interviews, they go, "Well, I don't have exactly the experience for this," and so how? And I always think like people love a well-told story. Told story. It's why like podcasts and audio have exploded over the last 10 years, and people love stories. So the ability to turn your narrative, your story into a story is really helpful, right? Like, so, hey, I went and did this, and I learned this, and so being and the way you create that story is by definition of personal brand. And so that's another thing I talk to people a lot about is like, it sounds almost cheesy to do, but like, what is your personal brand? How would you write the copy of a personal brand? Like a brand is just a collection of attributes, right? Regardless if it's Coke, FedEx, or Miller Lite. Like they're just attributes. And I'm going to channel a person I've worked with for 18 years at the agency named Tim O'Mara, who has instilled this in me, and I think about it all the time. And his saying is that brands are a collection of attributes, but they have to be the right set of attributes, and they have to be relevant, authentic, and differentiating. So authentic, absolutely, you have to be true to yourself. They have to be relevant to whoever you're communicating with, and they have to be differentiating. And you have to actually find all three of those, because if you only have two of those, you can find yourself into some bad places. If you're relevant and authentic but not differentiating, well, you just blend in. And if you're relevant and differentiating but not authentic, well, the people see through you. And then if you're authentic and relevant but not different, you can become a commodity. So all these different things, and that translates to personal brand too. And I only go through that to say, when you're in that interview, you want to have a really good sense of what your personal brand is, because that's kind of your backbone. And then all these other things that you're talking to can tie back into an authentic personal brand story and allow you to tell that story. So you're always coming back to a place that feels very comforting to you and very comfortable to you, and you're secure and confident in it, regardless of what questions asked. You can tie it back to that. So just thanks for giving me a second to expound on that, but I think it's an important point.
No, of course. That's all of us in the room right now are smiling because in integrated marketing communications, a huge segment of that class is creating your own independent personal brand. And you have to do all of the things that you're touching on, creating, all of your brand attributes, your values, your mission, your value proposition statement. All of these things is just to know who you are and how you can connect and make that personal connection to a company or an agency or whatever you're planning to do. So it's awesome to know that that is such a strong skill that you have to have be able, in order to succeed and be able to be confident in yourself when searching for jobs and such. So that was awesome to hear. Thank you for that. So last episode, we asked our guest, Chad Lindstrom, who actually graduated from Western in 2010, if he had any questions for late career alumni. And he wanted to know if there was anything defining in your career that really pushed you to that next stage, or what was that spark that really has kept you going?
Yeah, so I'll answer that two different ways. The thing that kind of propelled me it was, I think, the work that we did for Saint Michel. I had a wine background, um, but when we started working with Saint Michel, um, we unlocked a lot of opportunity. I mean, like not just agency opportunity. Like, here's how we can help this brand, and here's all. And like, imposter syndrome is real, right? Like it's absolutely real. But um, but that can either kind of like suppress you or scare you, or it can fuel you, and you can go like, okay, I got to figure this out. So we identified opportunities, and in my leadership on that, I identified, and I didn't know how to get to, like, I didn't know always what I was doing or how to do, but I had a an idea of where we need to go, and you just kind of try to figure it out along the way. And in doing so, um, I look back on that, and those were big steps in my career. How do you galvanize a team? How do you walk into a boardroom with clients and put a strong recommendation in front of them? How do you lead really kind of complicated strategic issues? How do you take on new capabilities that as an agency you've never done, but really figure out how they work and to high value of the client? So I think that experience really helped me over those 7 to 8 years we worked with St. Michel. And then the last part of your question, what keeps me going? I still love this business. I guess it's can't get too far. Like I called myself an ad baby at one point, but it's true. Like I just it's an amazing business. There are tough days. There are it's a grind. Sometimes you go, like, what are we doing or what am I doing? But I think that's a lot of jobs. And then but the ability to work, interesting, cool, dynamic people find their way to agencies, and I've always really enjoyed that. And then being able to build something collectively with them is really, really cool. And as I look back now in 25 years of our agency, there's a pride, familial, sure, but I've been here for 18 years, and so there's a pride to keep it going and honor that legacy while continuing to build what I think is a pretty special place. So I think that's what keeps me going.
Yeah, that's awesome. Again, just touching back on the IMC class, it's just Dan really wants to lead us to find our passion, because I know personally when I first went into business, I was like, well, I know that it's going to be stable for me. It's a stable career choice. I'm going to be, financially secure. And work is just, a way to get a paycheck, but you can find passion in what you do, and you can find enjoyment and fulfillment. And it's reassuring to hear that still, even 18 years after being with the same company, you still are able to find that every single day.
Absolutely. And I would say if people who are mid or late, I guess in my case, in their career, can't find that anymore, it's time to change it up, because we spend too much time at our jobs. They occupy too much of our life and mind space to detest what you do, or for not to derive some sort of passion. So I think that's really important.
Yeah. And you touched on this a little bit, and the marketing industry can be a little scary because it is constantly changing, but that allows for endless opportunities to grow as a marketer. So with that in mind, where do you hope to see yourself 10 years down the line?
Yeah, I think that continuing to lead this agency forward. I'm 41, so I'm certainly not like long in the tooth. I think I still have good work in front of me. Um, what I want to do is, this gets a little bit of inside baseball of advertising, but a lot of great independent agencies have emanated from different advertising areas, and not always like New York, Chicago, LA, right? Like Fallon grew up in Minnesota. Crispin Porter Bogusky grew up in Miami. Like there's different at Wyden Kennedy, which is probably the best agency on the planet now, started as a independent agency in Portland. Like, so I want to define Seattle by Copacino Fujikado, and have that be a nationally recognized agency that happens to be in Seattle. And that's my focus. That's my goal over the next 10 years, and continuing to lead a great team and continue to do great work. And at the end of the day, it sounds cheesy, but our clients buy results. That's why they hire us. They don't hire us for cool offices or funny people, or they hire us because we create difference in their business. So we have to do that every day, and that's what I want to help keep leading and achieving for our clients.
Yeah, and I just doing some research on the company, I feel like you guys are in that direction. I think I read that you guys were awarded the Small Agency Award 4 times now, I think in the
Yeah.
last 10 years or so. So I don't know. I feel like obviously I'm definitely an outside perspective, but just hearing how you speak of the company and the leadership that's associated with it, and just like the national recognition it's receiving, I feel like you guys are definitely on the way to achieving those goals.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. So that pretty much sums everything up. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. It's been such a pleasure to hear about your experience at Western, as well as, your experiences in the professional world. We are going to plug your LinkedIn in the description of the podcast. So if anyone wants to reach out, maybe ask you any more questions, if you're comfortable with that. And even, they just want to reach out to you. So thank you again for taking the time to be the very last guest and giving back to the marketing department. We hope you have a great rest of your day, and it was such a pleasure meeting you.
Thanks for having me. It was awesome to be here, and anything for Western, so thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to this week's episode of After Class featuring late career alum Chris Copacino. You can follow the Marketing by the Minute podcast to watch the last 2 episodes of After Class and get insight into each stage of the marketing journey. Thank you so much for listening.